welcome back to Elite Literary Book Group. I'm Rachel Beck, and today I'm going to go over chapter 12, but I do want to mention that I have a blog that's about Ghosts at a Watchman. If you've heard about Ghosts at a Watchman, and if you know any of the controversy behind it, it doesn't put Atticus in the best light. In fact, in Ghosts at a Watchman, it states that he is for segregation. So what happened was people read this and they felt like they'd been betrayed in a way because they had come to love Atticus, and then they find out, who he is, and the anger, from what I could tell, was really directed towards Harper Lee. We don't know why she would do this. Well, she, in my mind, didn't do it. She was 89 years old. Her sister, who's turned 103 and had just died, was like the executor of her work and her attorney and like the gatekeeper. So it just so happens that this manuscript was found, and Harper Lee was totally fine with it, even though her sister had mentioned that Harper Lee was profoundly deaf and blind, and who knows what else at 89. And it was always suspicious to me because I knew that Harper Lee didn't want to write another book. She didn't want to go through the publicity again. She told Oprah, if you ever watch a documentary that's really good called Hey Boo, Oprah was a huge admirer, and she wanted to see if Harper Lee would do an interview, but Harper Lee explained that she's really Boo in this story, and if you understand Boo, then you understand why I can't do it. And the ironic thing is, the negative reception did come, and the thing is, it wasn't a separate novel. It was a rough draft. It was probably the first rough draft she came up with. And then she came up with another rough draft, was called Atticus. And after that, the editors basically had her put it during the time when she was a child, so it could be a coming-of-age story, but also so it could be the characteristics of a great American novel. So people are getting upset over a rough draft. And when I read it and saw some passages that were sentences that were verbatim, like I mentioned last time, which I think the one I read wasn't the one that was verbatim, but it's in my blog. I just went, oh my gosh, who does that? What writer, especially one of Harper Lee's caliber, would have exact sentences from one book to another book? The only way this could be possible is if this was an earlier version. In the New York Times review and some other reviews, they do admit that it's an earlier version, but they still critique it as if it's a separate book that she wanted to put out, and that's just not fair. So anyways, if you're interested, click on the link below, and I have a blog about that. At the beginning of chapter 12, this is a sentence I would normally put on the board and have students try to emulate. This is a great way of learning how to write, and you can do this. This is how I learned how to write, and no one taught me how to write. I never learned how to write from grammar. I would never even begin to know how to teach someone to write just from grammatical rules. You learn by reading. You learn by looking at, and this is another thing about Ghosts at a Watchman that I point out in my blog, is the sentences. To Kill a Mockingbird is a work of revision. It's obvious. And if, I'll stop talking about it. But if you're interested, really read that blog. So look at the sentence. Okay, Jim was 12. Short sentence. He was difficult to live with. Inconsistent. Moody. Notice there's not an and there. You can do this. This is what gives you style. His appetite was appalling, and he told me so many times to stop pestering him. I consulted Atticus. And she puts the colon, and then this is how you set up a quote. Don't just do the quote, you know, especially when you're talking about a conversation, put us in the room. Reckon he's got a tapeworm? Atticus said. No. No, she doesn't have to directly quote him. She can tell you what he said. Jim was growing. I must be patient with him and disturb him as little as possible. And then Calpurnia starts calling him Mr. Jim, which really bugs her. Like, why all of a sudden? He's getting to a certain age where he's becoming a young man. And that's, you know, we wouldn't do this today, but during the time that was what you did. So, of course, this is going to cause more of a you know, kind of a natural separation where they're both going to start going a different way. And this is, knowing, like having an older brother like myself, this is a devastating time when he's not that interested in playing with you anymore, and when it's really not cool and he's into other things. He tells Scout to leave him alone. He's reading the paper. He's becoming more and more like Atticus. And so she's waiting on Deal to come, which he's not going to come. He gets a letter. She gets a letter from him. And you see also that there's this little flirtatious thing happening. Deal promises that he will marry her as soon as he gets up enough money. So she has this fiance now that she doesn't get to see. That's frustrating. She was miserable for 2 whole days. For kid time, that's a long time. But she also makes a comment that I was speaking to before, that was about Calpurnia. She's spending more time in the kitchen watching Calpurnia. And she says, by watching her, I began to think there was some skill involved in being a girl. So that this isn't, you know, the put down is Jim saying, you act more like a girl every day. Well, is it really that bad to act like a girl? Even though this is not what Scout wants to become as far as a lady, she also sees that there's skill in it, you know, that there's something to be admired about being able to handle all this kind of stuff. And it is important. It's important for other people. You know, it's not just a useless thing that you do. You may feel that way when you're a stay-at-home mom, I know that, but at the same time, you're the one who's keeping things going. And it's because you love your family that you make these sacrifices. So there's some honor in that. There's a caption in the newspaper of Atticus, barefooted and in short pants, chained to a desk. He was diligently writing on a slate while frivolous-looking girls yelled, yoo-hoo, at the window. And Jim looks at this and says, this is a compliment. They're talking about, you know, they're getting ready for the case, which is the biggest thing that's happening. It's in the newspaper, and just as there's, you know, you see comics of politicians and so forth, you see where Atticus is to be getting this kind of attention. So now they're seeing him in the paper. Now he's becoming kind of famous or notorious, depending on who you ask. And let's see. So he has to go away for a couple of weeks, and Calpurnia says, what am I going to do about church? And so she decides to take the kids to her church. And what you find is that Calpurnia is a little different when she goes into her black church. And one of the ladies starts a fight with her and says, what are you doing bringing these colored children, these white children into a colored church? Although she doesn't say colored church. She calls it nigger church. And Calpurnia says to her, when she's approaching, you know, stop right there, nigger, and she calls her nigger. So this is really strange to Scout and Jim. For one thing, they've never seen Calpurnia act this way. And she ends up telling the kids, someone else comes in and says, you know, we're glad to have you. And they realize these are the kids that are Atticus's kids. Okay, Okay, he's defending Tom Robinson. And so it goes from, Jim and Scout going, they don't want us here, to realizing that that these people are actually very appreciative of their dad. And they raise money for Tom Robinson's wife in this episode, and it's kind of interesting how the preacher, when he's getting a collection, now these people don't have very much money either to part with, but he demands that you give him money and says, I'm going to lock the door and no one's leaving until we raise enough money for Helen, which is Tom Robinson's wife. So here you see another example of the community coming together and saying, this is what we do, and if you have to sacrifice groceries for a week, it doesn't matter. We have to help her out. Another thing that's pointed out to Scout is that they don't have hymn books. And Scout says, well, why don't you get a collection for that? She said, it wouldn't matter because most of them can't read. And Calpurnia can, and she was taught. So what the kids are confused by is, well, why do you talk this way with them, and then at home, you talk like a white person? And she explains it to, if I came in here and talked that way, they would think I was putting on airs to beat Moses. People don't like it when you sound more intelligent. And remember, there's that ego thing and superiority thing. Now, if Calpurnia was arrogant, then of course she would. But she has the same kind of integrity and humility as Atticus. She's not going to do that with people because she knows that it makes other people envious and it brings out the worst in them. So, it's kind of like taking advantage of someone who doesn't have an education and getting into a debate with them. And I know it's very tempting, like when you're on Facebook or whatever, but you also have to kind of realize how you're going to make them feel. And Maya Angelou said once, people will forget what you say, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. So there again, it's that kind of humility. It's where you don't have to show everybody how brilliant you are. People will know, and they will respect you more if they feel like, you're one of them and you're not looking down on them, because that makes people very insecure. So I think this is just kind of a glimpse of Calpurnia's character. And this is really all the chapter talks about. And then you get into, they're going back home and they see Aunt Alexandra there. And Aunt Alexandra is Scout's nemesis. But I'll get into that next time. All right, thanks for watching.